Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 2020 Tuan Centennial Professorship Lecture. My name is Yung Gian Wen. I'm your host today. The lecture will be conducted by Professor Louis Fee. Professor Louis Fee is the Dean of College of Engineering and the Tuan Centennial Professorship in Mechanical Engineering at NTU Singapore. He actually graduated from NTU with both bachelor and master degrees. Later, he obtained his PhD from Scuola Superiore Sant'Anna, Pisa, Italy in 2002 with the European Union Scholarship. His research interests include medical robotics and the mechatronics in medicine. He's currently a recipient of the prestigious National Research Foundation Investigator Award. Professor Fee is more than an active researcher. He's also an entrepreneur and is the co-founder of 2 NTU startups and an advisor and a mentor to entrepreneurial faculty members like myself and his students. Professor Fee has also been a frequent award winner throughout his career. He was awarded with the Young Scientist Award, the Outstanding Young Persons of Singapore Award, the Nanyang Outstanding Young Alumni Award, and the President Technology Award in Singapore, and the Nanyang Award in Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and also the Nanyang Alumni Achievement Award. The title of his talk today is The Future of Flexi Endoscopy, One Technology at a Time. Without further delay, let's welcome Professor Louis Fee on stage.
Very good morning, everyone. Yeah, my name is Louis Fee, and I'd like to welcome all colleagues and students of NTU. I also understand that people are also dialing from outside of NTU and even outside of Singapore. So a very warm welcome to everybody. The year was 1995. At that time, I was a third-year undergraduate student at Nanyang Technological University. I was at the School of the Mechanical and Production Engineering. At that time, that was what it's called, MPE. So I've just finished the third year and I was choosing my final year project. I looked at the list and one title caught my eye. I could still remember the title. It was Automation of a Colonoscope. So at that time, I understood what automation was, but I didn't know what a colonoscope was. So I made an appointment with the supervisor, the late Professor Ng Wan Seng then, and he explained to me what colonoscopy was, and he showed me this. Yeah, this is a similar scope that he showed me at that time. So basically, this is what a colonoscope is, okay? So as its name suggests, this is a tube that you put into a patient, okay? In this case, it is It goes through the anus, and it has inside of it optical fibers. It has a CCD camera at the tip. It has a light source, and this will enable the doctor to look inside the colon, which is pretty long. But to do that, he has to navigate this tube right up, all the curves, right up to the cecum, which is the end of the colon. So I was fascinated. I thought, wow, this is a great tool, you know. And I took the project, and that's how the story began. And I've been fascinated about this idea of pushing a tube into a human patient, okay, for therapeutic use, okay. So apparently I scored very well for my FYP. I'm happy about that, okay, which is basically a FYP standard, okay, final year project. It's basically to move this automatically. It is far from being used in a commercial clinical setting. But I was so intrigued, I went on into postgraduate study, all based on this idea of pushing a tube into a human being. The first project that I took after graduation was to really look at an actual way of propelling a colonoscope into a human being, okay? So I was inspired by the inchworm, okay? How an inchworm moves from one leaf to another, okay? And then I was thinking, well, instead of pushing a scope from the outside, it makes more sense to be pulling the scope from inside into the cecum. And that's why I did further studies, okay? And the difficulty about building such a robot in the colon is that there is interaction between the robot and the soft tissue. And unlike a rigid tube, the colon in this case, it is still a tube, but it has a tube with no definite shape, okay? If you take out a piece of colon, you put it into a glass, it becomes the shape of the glass, okay? So the interaction between a mechanical system and a viscoelastic system like the colon, that was a lot of fundamental work to understand. Okay? But having done that, you know, I went on to you know, build prototypes, do more modeling, do more testing, and this is one of the tests you can see here. That is a much younger version of me. The guy had more hair and a smaller tummy, right? And at the end of the day, we had a system that was pushed out into the commercial world. So here you can see that the final product, we do have in some parts of the world, okay, a colonoscope that actually moves like an inchworm into the cecum, okay? And it is disposable, okay? But it still does its job of inspecting the entire colon for colon cancers, for tumors, and as such. The next thing I did, again, getting inspiration from nature, okay? In this case, it was a chili crab, okay? I had a dinner, I remember, with an endoscopist. And jokingly, he told me, well, you know, with a scope like this, as I've showed you, he's able to go into the cecum, into the colon, or from the top into the stomach. But there's not much the endoscopist can do. The most, he can put in a very simple tool to grab a piece of tissue for biopsy purposes. Okay, and he was saying to me, well, it would be great if you give me arms, you know, arms that pop up at the tip of the colonoscope here. And he's able to control these arms to do simple form of surgery, in this case, to cut out a cancerous tumor from inside the intestine. So I thought, well, that may be possible. So we started a long journey on creating this device. Okay? The difficulty, again, is because of its size. You have something that has to fit into a small little scope like this. And if you're driving it through cables and tendons, then at such a small scale, you worry about the forces. You worry about the unpredictable friction that exists in these cables. You worry about deformation, elongation of the materials. So in short, the control engineering behind this system becomes a nightmare. But you know, through perseverance, we managed. And in the end, here you see on the video here was one of the first human trials that we carried out in a patient. In this case, it was taking out a piece of cancerous tumor from the stomach, from the mouth. We're not making any more holes, okay? You're just using the natural orifice to get an entry. So you can see that, again, it is the inspiration from the crab, okay? The crab has just very simple claws. It is not like our hands with such high dexterity and maneuverability, okay? The crab claws are just, you know, enough dexterity to pinch onto food, to tear it apart and put it in its mouth. And that's exactly what we need over here in this particular procedure. Okay, so the robot was able to slice and dice. In this case, the left arm is the grasper, okay, because to do such operation, you need two arms. You need two arms to provide triangulation. And then the right arm over here is a monopolar cautery tool, which is very high current, where you can slice at the same time cauterize as you slice the tissue. Okay, so we have gone a long way, and I've started a company, and the company is doing well. It's in the middle of clinical trials. It should be in the market very soon. So that was the first mile, and that's what I've done previously. But my fascination with pushing a tube into a human being did not stop there. Okay, I start to ask more questions. How can we do things better? Okay, so let's go into the second mile, and I'll be sharing with you what I've been doing in this area, okay, of flexible endoscopy. Okay, the first area will be to augment the current functions of the endoscopic surgical robot. Okay, the second would be looking at forces and motion in the flexible endoscopic system. And then the third would be to consider a possible third hand for the surgeon. And then I'll be sharing some future trends that I've also gone into. Okay, let's look more into augmenting the functionality of a flexible endoscopic robot. As you can see in the robot that I've developed so far, okay, the chili crab robot, I'm able to pick tissue, stretch it, and slice it. Okay, but that's all I can do. I cannot make a deep cut, because as soon as I make a deep cut, then you know, I need to mend it, right? So the next goal for flexible endoscopy is really suturing, okay, which is basically sewing up the tissue. This is how a suturing procedure is. I'm sure you're all familiar, right? This is in open surgery. So you can see that this is the most secure way of actually tying up tissue together. You know, many have tried to use other ways of securing tissue by means of clips, but it is not as secure as suturing. Okay, you can talk to any surgeons, they would insist that suturing is the gold standard of closing and mending tissue. Okay, so this becomes a very important challenge going forward for endoscopy. Because if you have the power to mend, if you have the power to suture, then that gives you the power to even cut more, right? And by cutting more, you can do a lot more, right? So basically in surgery, it's of soft tissue, you're talking about cutting and mending, okay? You cannot do more cutting if you do not know how to mend. And this is especially so if you want to go out and make minimally invasive surgery a reality, right? So imagine that you go in from the mouth, okay, internally, you're not making any external holes, using a flexible endoscopy, and you purposely make a cut through the stomach, and your scope gets out of the stomach to access the peritoneal cavity. That's where you have your liver, you have your lungs, and all the other organs. And then you can do your cutting. You can, you know, purposely take out a tumor from the lungs, for example, and then you come back. Okay, you come back through the hole that you made, and very importantly, you have to mend that hole. And once you're able to mend that hole, then you're able to leave the system. So that is, you know, where we are heading for. Okay, so the challenge, of course, is to have suturing in a flexible endoscopic system. Up to now, nobody has done it. It is very, very challenging. And let's look at the intricacies of it. Basically, the constraint would be, again, the size. It is such a small size that it is difficult to again, increase the dexterity. If you have the dexterity, then obviously you are able to sew like a human hand. Okay, but because of the size, you're not able to have the dexterity. And if you do achieve the dexterity, you may not have the payload or the forces to be able to pierce through tissue. So in the end, we devised something like this, a device, a mechanism like that, that can basically pass a needle from one arm to another arm through the tissue. Basically, that's the basis of suturing, passing a needle through tissue, okay, from one place to another. So you can see that this arm over here is designed to grab onto the needle as it passes from one arm to another arm. And with that, with the other manipulators that we already have, we were able to basically do suturing over here. Okay, this is an actual animal trial in a pig that we have done. And so what we've performed here is to purposely make a cut in the intestine, okay? And then with our surgical robotic system, flexible endoscopic system, we were able to sew up that cut. So I think this is a world first, and it's very exciting because now that we are able to do it, then the next step is to explore a variety of other procedures that we can do endoscopically. And when you do things endoscopically, it means that you have no cuts from the outside, okay? You are not destroying any tissue, any healthy tissue. You're just looking at the tissue that you are interested in to take out that particular tissue, and then you sew back up the tissue, right? So that has been very exciting. So again, we found out that once you make a cut in the tissue, okay, in a tubular system like the colon or the small intestine or even the stomach, then the air pressure will balance with what's internal, which means you do not have a positive pressure anymore. Okay, in the case of a colon, okay, you need a working space to be able to see things around the colon when you're inside the colon. You also need this working space to be able to manipulate the tissue. Okay, but once you make a true cut into the colon, all this air will escape into the peritoneum cavity, and the whole colon will collapse. And once it collapses, that's it. You can't see anything. You can't do any manipulation. Okay, so that is again a big problem in today's context, right? Because we are using air to basically create this working environment. But again, as I said, the next step is really to willingly make a cut so that we can access other organs. So how do we overcome this problem? So we also thought of a support structure for a collapsed colon. So you can see here, what we want to achieve is a structure that can of the colonoscope, okay? And when it does, it should form a structure like a tent, okay? A skeletal tent, so that even if the colon collapses, you have this space that you are able to work inside, okay? So then you are not afraid of making this perforation in the colon, okay? So you need to deploy something like what you see in the emergency inflatable staircase that pops out from the plane, right? It has to be done like that. But the difficulty is that this inflatable staircase must then go back into the plane after its use. So that's the challenge that we pose to ourselves. And at the end of the day, you can see that we came up with a very interesting structure that is able to come out of the distal end of a scope, as you can see over here. And once it is out there, it deploys itself into a tent-like structure, which is strong enough to resist the compression forces of the colon when it collapses. Okay. And then at the same time, we make sure that after we have done the procedure, the surgical procedure, we are able to collapse it, as you can see over here, and it goes back the same way it came out from. Okay. On the right over here, you see that we have done it on a live animal. Okay. Here, the perforation has been done, and the whole colon has already collapsed. But because of the structure, you can see that you still have the working space to be able to work in and to mend the hole. And that's where the suturing tool comes in. Okay. And then after doing this, we realized that, well, let's look at how we can improve the stiffness or have a variable stiffness of the scope that we see here. Let me bring out the scope again. So you can see over here that the scope is flexible, which is important. Okay? You need a flexible scope to be able to get into all the curves that you have in the colon or the intestines or in the stomach. But when you reach the site of interest, you would require the scope to be stiff. Okay? You need a stiff scope so that it can hold on to the forces at the distal end when you do your manipulation of the tissue. So it's very desirable to have a scope that is flexible on command, but also it becomes stiff when you want it to be. Okay? So again, we went back to the drawing board and we found that we can use materials to solve this problem. Okay? So with materials like PET, you can see that PET itself, depending on a temperature, it can change from a stiff state into a flexible state. Okay? Once it passes a transition temperature, it changes this mode. Okay? So if you can incorporate such material as tubes, useful tubes, functional tubes within the scope, you can achieve a certain form of variability in terms of stiffness. Okay, so here we have done a lot more tests. And the thing about the variation of a temperature is obviously you need to heat up and you need to cool it on command. Okay, so we have also looked at means of transferring heat throughout the whole scope on command. Okay, but at the same time, we need a cooling system to be able to cool down the PET tubes on command. So that is a very interesting study that we have also done. Next, I'd like to look at the forces and motions that we encounter in flexible surgical robots. Right? So the hot topic today is artificial intelligence. You know, how can we use artificial intelligence, deep learning, machine learning in a surgical robotic system like what you have seen over here? Okay, one challenge about the flexible endoscopic system is that you need to know what is happening at the distal end. It is an entirely new environment inside. Okay, it has its own working space, and there's interaction between the robotic arms, the robotic tools, as well as the soft tissue. Okay, as you pull onto the soft tissue, you want to know the forces that are being acted upon the soft tissue. And at the same time, there are parts that you can't see, and you need to be aware of them as well. Okay? For example, you may be pulling and cutting on tissue, but certain parts of the scope or the robotic arm is in contact with another part of the tissue that you're not aware of, and it is making a puncture that you don't want in the other part of the tissue. So we need to be aware of all these parameters and all these different forces, different friction that is happening at the distal end. Okay, and with such a system, again, space is a constraint. So if we can have better ways of getting this information, without using space, okay, which are already a big constraint with so many mechanical parts, then that will be a solution. So using artificial intelligence, okay, we were able to look at predicting the forces at the distal end. Okay, so what we have done here is to collect information that you can get from the outside. Okay, in this case, because the system The robotic system is driven by cables, there are motors, there are sensors, there are encoders, which are situated outside of the human body. Okay, so these are the information that we can readily get. Okay, and then we use a neural network system, okay, to learn. Okay, it's an architecture where we will teach the robotic system, the AI system, to correlate between the parameters that we can get and what's happening at the distal end. In this case, we teach the robot. Of course, when you teach, you would have the actual ground truth forces at the distal end. Okay, so by using this neural network, okay, and the more data that we have, okay, the more accurate it becomes, and the predictability of the forces become more and more accurate. Okay, so this is how we do the training. Okay, looking at the proximal forces and the motor movements. Okay, and of course it goes through unpredictable bands, and with each band there's unpredictable friction, and the system just learns by itself. And in the end, we were able to a certain degree, predict the forces from this artificial intelligence system. Okay. We have also tried using AI to predict, to not predict, but to actually help the endoscopies in his job. Okay. Basically, the endoscopies, when he puts in a tube, like a flexible endoscope into the patient, he'll be looking out for tumors, he'll be looking out for polyps, like you see over here, okay? And then he will determine whether they are malignant, whether they are cancerous, and whether to remove it or any other therapeutic procedures that has to be done, okay? But we are all humans, so as we push this tube and you have the endoscopic view, okay, you may miss out things. Right? It's not the surgeon's fault. It's not the endoscopy's fault, because this is how it is. We do miss out things, and it is a very unpredictable environment out there. So again, using AI, we are able to teach the system to pick up these possible tumors, these possible polyps that exist. Okay? It is not 100%, because only the trained eye, a very, very experienced endoscopist, will then tell you that, oh yeah, that is indeed a polyp or a tumor. But if the system can be trained, you know, in such a way that they would just alert the endoscopies to certain things that the endoscopies has missed out. Could be wrong, okay? But in this case, you rather be wrong, right? So you want an AI system that would, you know, come up with green little boxes, as you can see here, that pops up as the surgeon or the endoscopist pushes this flexible endoscope into the colon, that alerts you that, hey, this little bump here, it could be a polyp. I'm just telling you, okay? You may not agree with me, but I'm just telling you, okay? So with such a system, the accuracy of the procedure increases a lot. So such systems are already pushing its way into the market to help the endoscopies to improve the surgical, the procedural outcome. Okay. The next topic I'd like to talk about is the force and pulse sensing for a flexible endoscopic system. As I mentioned, we need to know what's going on at the distal end of a flexible endoscopic system. Okay, you can use AI, that's good. Okay, but AI is as good as the data that you provide the system with. Okay, but me being a mechanical engineer by training, I also like to use mechanical means, actuators and sensors that we can get out there. So the challenge in sensing the forces at the distal end is again size. And if you want to introduce a mechanical system, then it has to be extremely small. You cannot use the conventional force sensors that we have in the market. They're just too big, they're just too expensive, right? So we have to look at novel ways of doing it. And we found that one way of doing it is to use fiber braid grating, okay? FBG for short. And this sensor basically is an optical sensor that very much behaves like a strain gauge. Okay? So The idea is to cleverly embed it into the system, into the cables, and ensures that it does not take up extra space. Okay, so in this case, we were able to adhere the FPG sensors onto nitinol tube. Okay, and we use nitinol because of its super elastic property. And we make it part of the tendon and sheath mechanism that we use to actuate the robotic system. And because it's part of this tendon and sheath mechanism, it feels the forces, the compressive and the tensions of the forces. And if we put it at the distal end, then we can definitely equate that we are indeed feeling the forces that are felt by the manipulators, the robotic manipulators at the distal end, as the robotic arm picks up the tissue, stretches it, cut the tissue. So we've done quite a lot of work. Of course, we started with 1, 2 dimensions, but we were able very recently to increase it to have cleverly putting it into the robotic arm. And now we have a 3-axial force sensor. So what you see in the video here is very interesting, and it's basically what is missing in today's teleoperation or surgical robotic systems. So what we have done is that with this FPG sensors put into the distal end of the scope of the robotic arm, as the robotic arm picks up tissue, okay, and in this case is emulated by the pincers over here acting on, sorry. Okay, great. So in this case, you can see that the pincers here act as the soft tissue that's interacting with the robotic manipulator. And the forces, the FPG sensors pick this up, and it's transmitted back into the processor, and the processor knows that certain forces are being acted onto the robotic manipulator. The haptic device you see over here then display the forces onto the user. So the person here is not moving his arm. The haptic device is moving his arm. So this gives him the sensation that certain forces are being acted in the robotic arm. Okay? So with this, we are able to realize haptic feedback, okay, which is important in surgery. You want to feel as you pick on to the tissue, as you pull it, as you cut it, you need this force feedback so that it will augment the reality of actually doing the surgery. Okay? And this will improve accuracy. It will also improve safety. Okay, we are now in the final phase of actually implementing a rotational angle sensor for this particular robotic arm using FPG sensors. So with a rotation angle sensor, you are then able to feel torques. And this is important when you do suturing, where you need to push the needle into the soft tissue. Okay, the next topic is very fundamental, I would say. Okay, so as we look into, augmenting the functions of the endoscope, okay, I also like to take back to look at the fundamental problem of pushing a tube into the human body. So you can see here that instead of putting sensors at the distal end or using artificial intelligence to sense what's happening on the distal end, okay, can we not just push this tube in, okay, and then imagine you close your eyes, but all you can feel is these forces that acts between the scope and your hand as you push and as you torque. You give the scope a torque, a rotational movement over here. There's always feedback as you push this forward. And as the scope, the distal end of the scope meets a curve, as you can see here, then you will feel more resistance, okay? So can we not model something, go down to basic, of just with this information of obstruction as you push in and as you twist the scope, be able to give you the different bends or the angle of bends that you meet as the scope goes past and as it goes past and navigates these different curves and bends. So that is what we're looking at. It's very mathematical, but the idea is to predict, using all these forces, a model to enable the system to know how many curves and bends, okay, whether it's 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional curves as it goes into the cecum. So at the end of the day, what we want is, without using any sensors at all, just from information collected as you push onto the scope, you are able to draw up a model of the colon as the scope passes into the colon. Okay, may not be accurate, but it is good enough to establish all the different curves, and from the different curves that you have, you can establish a frictional model that will tell you how your manipulators will react at the distal end. So this is very fundamental work. It is far from being translated down into actual practice, but I think that such work is important to enable us to understand the basis of the problem that we're facing. And then the next topic I'd like to talk about is, can we introduce a third hand for the surgeon? Okay, surgeons are, used to having two hands, or the endoscopies, right? But then you can have the foot that can behave like a hand as well. We all drive. Basically, we're using the foot as well. Okay, but of course, we have to understand the capabilities of the foot. The foot is not as intuitive as that of our hands, but again, it can be used to perform all kinds of procedures to help the endoscopies in its work. Okay, so here we are able to use a foot control, a 4-degree degree of freedom foot control, to move the robot to press all these little buttons that you see over here. And then when we've done that, we were able to use a foot control to control the angulation of a scope, as you can see over here. And finally, combining it with a teleoperation system, okay, you can see that possibly an endoscopist can use both his hands and one foot to control and manipulate a highly dexterous robotic endoscope. I think the challenge here is not about the engineering. I think this is quite easily done. Okay, the challenge is actually to look at the intuitiveness of using the foot together with your arms at the same time. Okay, to look at how us as human beings can adapt to using a foot as you use your arms to manipulate very intricate surgical manipulators, as you can see over here. So what's the future trend? Again, we look at things that inspire us. So one way forward is really, in any case, if you push a tube into the human body, there will be friction. Okay? And the friction causes a lot of problems in terms of educating a new endoscopist to do his work. The self-propelling robot that I discussed earlier on, okay, that also has its problems, because even though the propulsion is from internal, okay, it still has to pull the tail end of a scope, and that again introduces a lot of friction into the system. So here the inspiration is to look at how plants grow. Okay, you can see here that as the plant grows, okay, in this case you look at the roots. Once the roots grow, the part that has grown will no longer have any relative movement with the soil. So similarly, if you can build a system that grows, okay, a growing robot in this case, then whatever part that has come in contact with the colon will stay there. There will be no longer relative movement. So you can basically have no more friction as you propel a tube into the human body. So this is what I meant. You can see here that we have developed a few versions of growing robot, right? So as the robot grows over here, you can see that there's no more relative movement with the environment, okay? At the same time, if you are able to manipulate the robot to turn and to bend, then essentially you have a growing robot that can go into the colon, okay, navigate the curves, and there's no friction between the robot and the colon, which would be a very, very good a solution, okay, to introducing an external tool into the human body in the future. Okay, you can see in the last video over here, we are able to navigate to avoid the egg with this growing robot. Okay, so I've been talking about pushing a tube into the patient, okay? And obviously, we have made a lot of breakthroughs, okay, on improving the situation, on using a tube. But the next question will be, why not go tubeless, okay? Why don't we just throw away the tube and introduce something that has no tail, okay? And of course, we are talking about pills that you can ingest. Of course, it has to hold on to its own power source, and there's a lot of complications to overcome. But again, that is the next paradigm, I believe. So in my group, we have also looked at robotic pills. Okay, in this case, we have a pill that can be ingested. It goes in the stomach, and on command, using an external magnetic force, it will actuate and blow itself up into a balloon. Okay? And all it does as a balloon in the stomach is to occupy space. And if you occupy space in your stomach, you will feel full, okay? And you tend not to eat so much. And hopefully, you would lose a few kilograms in the process. And of course, on another actuation, this balloon should deflate, okay? And the pill should automatically come out naturally from the other end. So this is my last slide, okay? You can see that my fascination about pushing a tube into a patient lasted for up to now 25 years. Okay? I think I've made a few breakthroughs, my team and I. Okay? But it depends on how you look at the problem. 25 years, I could have just looked at the endoscope that we have here and say that, oh wow, we have a wonderful ability of pushing a tube into a person for medical purposes. We can just stop there. Or we can say, wow, this is great, but there are a lot of problems about pushing a tube into a patient. And I decided to look at the second statement, and this second statement stuck with me for 25 years. And this drove me to look at other ways to improve the situation. And hopefully 20 years down the road, some other researcher can take over this problem, and technologies would advance to such a state where people are talking about a tubeless way of getting into a patient, right? And that's how we would move forward. So I hope that I'd like to inspire all the other researchers to have the mindset of the second statement over here. Look at your problem, okay? The issue, the project that you're doing, and always think out of the box to look at new ways of making things better. So with that, thank you very much.
Welcome back. Thanks, Professor Fee, for a very inspirational talk and a share of his journey to get to what he has been doing so far. It's a great journey of 25 years with a few disruptive technology over the time. Now we open up for the questions. I will have the first question asked Prof. Fee. So In his view, what surgery in the future will? Oh, sure. Thanks again. I do see some questions coming from the audience. So I will start the questions from the audience first, and then I will ask some questions of my own, as I've been working with Prof. Fei for the last couple of years. So Prof. Lim Feng asked, how do you handle bleeding and possibly complication in real time when you're doing these surgeries?
Right. It depends on the cautery tool, right? So as we cut, we not only cut with high current electricity. This cautery tool would also arrest the bleeding as it cuts. Okay? So it is a balance of cutting as well as cauterization. Cauterization will stop the bleeding. Okay, so sometimes you want to cut more, but the more you cut, the more bleeding there will be. So the parameters real time have to be adjusted such that you can cut as well as arrest the bleeding at the same time. For large bleeding, certain times in endoscopic procedures, we will have bleeding that spurts, okay, and that cannot be arrested with a cautery tool. Okay, so we have to quickly put in a clip. Okay, by putting a clip, you stop. You're actually clipping the vessel, okay, and you stop the bleeding. Okay, and after you stop the bleeding, you can cauterize the exit point of the spurting, and you can continue with the procedure.
Okay, thanks, Louis. So now I have a question. So I'm fascinated about this new technology working within in the medical. So how would you see what the future the surgery will be look like?
Okay, so if you talk to your doctor friends, okay, you can see that currently, or at least in the past 50 years, there are clinicians and there are physicians. Okay, under clinicians, you have the surgeons who would cut and who would do all the surgical procedures, and then you have the physicians who basically would tend not to do any manipulative procedures, but they would treat it, they would inspect, and they would give medicine to the patient. Okay, so in endoscopy, traditionally, the pushing of a scope is done by a physician and endoscopies. Okay, and that's why it is considered minimally invasive, because you're putting a tube into the patient, and the most the endoscopies will do, okay, is to take a biopsy, and that's it. But if he sees a big cancer tumor that needs to be taken out, the physician would then call the surgeon, okay, to remove the surgical the tumor through open surgery or laparoscopic surgery. So if you ask me, the future in endoscopic surgery is really to blur the lines between surgery and endoscopy. Okay, to give the endoscopies the power. Okay, if you can see in the chili crab robot example, now endoscopies are able really to manipulate and cut tissue. Okay, soon with a suturing tool, the endoscopies would be able to cut bigger holes to go into, to access other organs. At the same time, the surgeons, I'm seeing more surgeons becoming endoscopies. I'm seeing more surgeons, taking the time to learn the art of pushing a tube into a patient. And with a surgical experience, the surgeon will be even more confident to make all these cuts. So I would say very easily, it is already going on now. The lines between surgery and endoscopy will be blurred. And this would definitely benefit the patients.
Thanks. Another question comes from the audience is, what about miniaturizing these endoscopies further to a smaller tubes or smaller space in the body? So what are the limits and how small can we go in terms of further reducing the size of this endoscopy so it actually can be putting more capability into a limited size of space?
Yes. So as I explained to you during the talk, okay, space is the major constraint in such procedures. There's only so many things that you can put on board an endoscope. Okay, if you make it too large, then you can't put it through the natural orifices. Okay, but with today's technology, you'll be asking me, can we make it smaller? The answer is yes, certainly. Okay, but again, I think manipulation of soft tissue is not nanotechnology. It's not even micro technology. Okay, we are still in the range of millimeters. Okay, because you need to manipulate some form of soft tissue. Okay, and if you manipulate soft tissue, then you're talking about forces in terms of probably millinewtons. Okay, we're not talking about newtons, we're talking about maximum 1 or 2 newtons in that range. We are not talking about micronewtons, right? So if you need forces that are in the range of newtons to 1 or 2 newtons, this payload will require certain actuation, and that actuation, okay, would come about with certain sizes. So in a nutshell, the answer is yes, I would love to shrink things smaller, but because of what is required of the procedure, there's a limit into how small you can go. Okay.
Okay. So one more question from the audience. And in the video, they're showing the arms can cut pieces, but after cut, how would this parts been removed from the body, because the tube could be quite small to push through the parts cut of the intestines?
Right. So as you can see, I've been working on only soft tissue, okay? The tissue that you have in your gastrointestinal tract. These are not hard tissue. If it's hard tissue like the bone, then obviously there will be big problems, right? But soft tissue, because it's soft, because it's viscoelastic, a lot of the times we can just pull it through the channel that we use to put in all these tools. Okay, but for bigger tissues, and we have done even the tumors that are 5 centimeters wide. Okay, those are very large tumors. So what we have done is, after we have cut such a big tumor, okay, the grasper, the robotic arm grasper that you can see, will hold on tightly onto the tissue, and the entire scope will be pulled out together with the tissue at the distal end.
Thanks. One more question from the audience. It seems the audience quite active, ask questions. So by Prof. Chen Xiaodong, he said, I like the idea of bio-inspired soft growing robotics. But what are the challenges for such prototypes to be ready for clinical trials?
Oh, wow. Okay. So soft robotics is a new technology, okay, bio-inspired ones. It's very exciting, okay. So the technical challenge, again, is size, right? So we hope to be able to have, to develop such devices which are small enough to be introduced into the humans, but from your laptop prototype to reach the human, well, that is a long journey, okay? So it will take time, okay? Hopefully we will have good enough prototypes that will allow us to test on models, then on animals, okay? And once we have proven the efficacy in animals, then finally we can test it on human beings. But again, I feel that this is a very exciting field, you know, soft robotics, okay? And with all the flexible electronics that people are working on, there's a lot of future in such technology that can be implemented in the surgical setting.
So actually, as a computer scientist, I have a burning question I need to ask now. So in your view, will the AI and the machine performs better than the doctors and the surgeons in situations like this, you know, in your most optimistic view?
Right. So this is the buzzword nowadays: AI, data science. You know, how can it help the surgeon? You know, I would use the word help the surgeon. Okay, I mean, you know, if you jump straight into using AI to completely control a robotic system, I think that would be pretty scary in today's context. Okay? It may happen in 20 years' time. I don't know. Okay, but the advantages of AI is clear. Okay, AI is all about learning, machine learning. It's all about data collection. Okay, so if you have a system that an AI system, okay, that you train that has access to a lot of past experience data, okay, then the AI system would definitely, in terms of recognizing scenarios, be better than a very experienced endoscopist, for example. You know, the endoscopist is as good as his past experience, okay, which is maybe measured in terms of hundreds of procedures. But if you have an AI system that has seen thousands or hundreds of thousands of scenarios, then you know, obviously the AI system would recognize certain scenarios a lot better than a human can, right? And with that, you know, what follows, you know, how to approach that particular scenario would be better done by the AI system than the surgeon. Okay, so I would say that technically, okay, there's a lot of prospect, and in many areas, the AI system is already a lot better than a human person. But in surgery, there's a lot of human aspects to it that we need to be aware of. Okay, and we can't introduce technology into the surgical space so quickly. Yeah, we have to take it one step at a time.
Yeah, there's one more question from the audience. Rakasi, what friction law did you use for the soldering process between the endoscopy and the soft surrounding material? Do you think that the choice of law will be important? This is a little bit more technical.
The what law again?
The friction law.
The friction law.
Yeah.
Wow, that was quite long ago. I don't have that information, you know, at the fingertips now. Okay, but the friction, you know, model that we came up with is based on the viscoelastic property. Okay, which means it's totally dynamic. Okay.
Sure. So as we're getting close to this session, I have one more question, final question to ask you. So you are both a professor and and also the Dean of College of Engineering, and COE is one of the largest College of Engineering, also the high ranked College of Engineering in the world. At the same time, you are a professor, a researcher, an innovator, an entrepreneur, as well as a lecturer. Now, how would you be able to juggle across all these different activities in your life and still can make a technology breakthrough at the same time?
Yeah, I mentioned I also have 4 children. Yeah, so yeah, I think it's all about passion, okay, and management of time. Once you have passion, you just wake up in the morning and you just want to go and do that thing that you have set up for yourself on that particular day. And you somehow manage the time and you juggle everything. It's all these balls in the air that you have to juggle and make sure that none of these balls drop onto the ground. I could say that at the end of the day, I'm two things. I am a curious teacher. Okay, so as a teacher, I have this passion to train the engineers for the future. Okay, as Dean of the College of Engineering, okay, I think that it's my responsibility to train the engineers for Singapore, for this society going forward. And this is itself a very challenging but interesting stuff. Calling, as in, the future of engineers is changing rapidly. The way I was trained as an undergraduate, okay, should not be used in today's context, especially if we're talking about Industry 4.0. Okay, we should be looking to train engineers in a way that the future jobs are wanting them to be. Okay, which means they need to have depth in a particular discipline of research, but at the same time, the breadth becomes exceedingly more important. The engineer should also have information and know-how in disciplines that are not related to engineering. So that's the teacher part in me. Okay, and as I teach and as I learn, then the curious part of me comes out. Okay, the research that I do, I'll be asking more and more questions. And this is an example. Okay, my fascination about pushing a tube into the patient just 25 years ago. Okay, it has branched to so many other very exciting disruptive technologies that I'm looking at. Okay, and from there, once I bring certain knowledge level from this to that, then the next thing I'll be thinking is, are there real benefits for patients? Okay, and that drives me a lot. If something that I do can benefit patients, okay, to make sure that they stay a shorter time in the hospital, that the procedure is less painful and it costs less. This drives me to really translate, and that's the entrepreneur part of me that comes up. So yeah, I balance all this in my day-to-day job, and well, I think it's exciting, and I hope that everyone out there can find your passion. And once you have passion, your job becomes more of a very serious hobby than a job, and I'm sure you will do well in whatever you set out to do.
Okay, thanks again, Professor Luis V. Thanks all the audience to attend this session as well. So this concludes today's session. If you have any further question, you feel free to email either Prof. Fee or our College of Engineering. Thanks.
Thank you.